Welcome, everyone, to my interview today. I am Dr. Onani Carver. My guest today is Zach Bush, MD. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, as we will be exploring the interface of science and spirituality. And first, I want to be really clear about this. I'm a doctor of theology and energy medicine. I am a scientific theologian, meaning I look at the world from the perspective of creator, the process of creation, consciousness, transformation, and what gives us a sense of meaning and purpose. I am one of the many scientists contributing to the theory that matter emerges from consciousness. This is the science needed to usher in the planetary paradigm shift, recognizing the power that resides within us. Old materialist science simply recognizes our reaction to the external environment. Dr. Zach Bush is a medical doctor, a triple credentialed medical doctor. He sees the world from a different perspective, and I'll let him describe more about that in just a moment. I teach a certification program on the fundamentals of energy medicine. My research includes the essential role symbiosis plays in the evolution of consciousness throughout the 4.3 billion years of biological evolution. Symbiosis is the process of different species cooperating with each other for the benefit of all involved. In my research, I identified the 4 phases of creation, and I won the gold medal this past year for emerging scientists by the International Society of Energy Medicine. Dr. Zach studies a very similar thing, but from the perspective of a medical doctor. We're both mushroom nerds, but from completely different viewpoints. And we come to the same conclusion. I study how mushrooms and bacteria provide communication, connection, and transportation of resources when creating new species or new morphologies, and also within the vast ecosystems, such as a forest. Dr. Zach studies how these same microorganisms do the same thing within the human body. We both look at the essential role symbiosis plays in personal and planetary health. I'm so honored to introduce my guest today, Zach Bush, MD. Hi, Dr. Zach.
Thank you so much for having me on. I enjoy sharing time with all of you in the audience as well. Thank you.
Well, I'm so thrilled to be asking you about your work. I've heard several of your other interviews where you describe the connection of our toxic environment and chronic disease. And in this interview, what I really want to explore is possibility. There's plenty of information out there to understand what happens when you don't pay attention, the dramatic increase of chronic disease, the growing trend of chronic disease in younger and younger children, and how the toxicity of our food system is creating toxicity for the entire planet. And I want to go into what happens when I do pay attention. What happens when I walk barefoot on ancient lands and breathe ancient air and eat nutrient-dense foods? There's certainly more to it than just physical health. You made a comment with Dave Asprey from Bulletproof that made me follow your work. You said something like, you can't access spiritual guidance if you're dehydrated. And I was like, yes, I love this guy.
Yeah, nothing like a big black and white statement like that to freeze time there for a moment for everybody.
Oh gosh, I loved it. Yeah, so let's start with a brief description of your work. I've heard you make mention of like touching moments and light bulb moments and pivotal points in your career and research. So can you describe your work from the perspective maybe like of being guided, of your own awakening consciousness, your sense of purpose? And, you know, did you ever get kind of off track or lost or depressed, and how did you get back on track?
Yeah, I think I spent most of my life on, moving towards purpose, but certainly not necessarily on it. But in hindsight, I don't think there was a wasted moment. And so, while even in the places where I was, most perhaps off track from the human vantage point, where I seemed to be going down the wrong pathway of, medicine, for example. I was 10 years ago, I was developing chemotherapy and very much in the pharmaceutical mindset of health and wellness. I really thought that the solutions were going to come through technology. The solutions were going to come through better understanding disease, how it occurs, so that we could better design our medical interventions for it. And so as far off base as that seems to have been at the time, and for as depressed as I became in the practice of that, which was pretty profound, I reached a very deep state of questioning of everything, because I was experiencing a very malignant political environment in academia where I was for 17 years, and saw really short-sighted qualities in academic medicine, both at the University of Colorado and then later at the University of Virginia, two various universities, two various STEAM training programs, really, rising to a pinnacle of leadership within both of those environments. And, I should have really, I think, by the world standards, I should have been very excited about what was happening to me. But there was an increasing sense of devoid of knowledge or understanding of why I was doing or why it wasn't working in my patients, a real sense of frustration, certainly a sense of a lack of support. I didn't have support from my colleagues that was very durable. There was the structure of it. There was the suggestion that, this was going to be okay for me to, be supported in all this. But as soon as push came to shove in academia, you find knives in your back, or you find your contract yanked out from under you, you're just like a real sense of vulnerability, a sense of you're just a cog in the wheel and you could be replaced in a moment or let go. Right. And so all of those things, I think everybody can relate to, in the sense that we all at some point or another are working for a machine that certainly is not in a high conscious state, is certainly not in alignment with what we see around us in nature, which is wholly supportive, wholly co-creative, wholly regenerative. And, most of us find ourselves spending much of our day in jobs or other pursuits to pay the bills that are simply not in that high vibration state. But again, it doesn't mean it's wasted. I think every chapter that comes into your life is there on purpose. And right. If I hadn't gone down that route, and if I hadn't been wallowing in that pharmaceutical model, I would not have recognized the molecule that would become, a big piece of my future now and a lot of my purpose now, which is to understand the relationship between this invisible nature around us in the microbiome and human physiology and human health. And so I ended up recognizing those molecules in 2012 from a soil science paper, because the three-dimensional structure of that molecule, had it been depicted in the paper, would have been seen to have had a very similar structure to the chemotherapy I used to develop out of vitamin A compounds. So it was just, you don't know why you're being or how you're being prepared for your purpose. To say that I was off purpose being in academic medicine for all that time probably is not true either. I was being groomed for my moment. And I'm not, in my current worldview, I'm not even really sure it's possible to be off purpose.
That's right. Yeah. That's what I discovered in the four phases of creation. It's built into the creation process, these times of constriction, just like a butterfly. That goes inside the cocoon, and it's that constriction that then creates the next step.
Yes, yeah. I think that's right. And I think that the metamorphosis that takes place is a inherently destructive process that you talk about there. I had a naturalist point out to me more than a decade ago that if you watch carefully, right as a caterpillar is about to create the cocoon around itself, it drops one part of its body off before entering the cocoon to make sure it doesn't enter the cocoon with it, and that happens to be its head. And so
That's right.
telling about that is don't even bring your brain into the metamorphosis space. You know, that can only slow down the process of transformation if you bring your brain with you. So I think it's really telling that the metamorphosis begins with a release or a surrender to the structures you understand, the structure and belief of what you are at the moment, and really
Right.
sets you up for a very, you know, seemingly violent process where all of your tissues are dissolved to bring forth this phoenix that would rise out of that mush.
Mm-hmm.
I think all of us have experienced the mush state, you know, and
Right.
unfortunately, I think we're taught to see it as failure. We're taught to see that as a period of darkness. When if we could see it for what it is, which is yet another gift in our life, yet the most important, perhaps, you know, catalyst for transformation and change, we would embrace those moments differently. And so I try to do that now increasingly often now, where if I start to have friction with my wife or friction with my kids or, you know, friction with a coworker or employee, I try to quickly shift my perspective of like, okay, why am I getting frustrated with this scenario?
Right. Exactly.
Is for a purpose. What is it that I'm supposed to learn? This other person is supposed to learn from this. And the faster we can accept, okay, this is a gift, no matter how it feels, the emotional experience of it is not true. The emotional experience you're having with anything in the moment is a programming from previous past experience and nothing to do with the moment. And so, you know, as fast as you can detach yourself from the emotional experience of what's going on and ground into this is in my path, therefore it's in purpose, therefore I need to learn from it so that I can get into the fast flow of co-creation with nature that I really want to be in. And if you, I'm sure many of you, if not every single one of you, has experienced at some point in your life that sense of, wow, that was an extraordinary moment. I felt like I plugged into source and I had this explosive creative streak, which may have been you started a company or you started, you know, you envisioned a product, or it was more ethereal where you suddenly, you know, a whole philosophy in your life and you really started to kind of key into something like that. So these are the things that I think you can start to say, okay, we're always moving towards purpose, always in purpose, moving
Right.
towards that flow.
And so how do you like relate the body or the physical health of the body to this sense of purpose? Or what are some of the stories that you've seen in your own patients where the physical transformation kind of like forces, or maybe the disease process forces maybe like a spiritual awakening?
Yeah, I think this is, in a lot of ways, I think maybe your first phase of spirituality, which is this, you know, kind of crisis state of transformation or crisis rationale for transformation. And this is definitely how we've been reactive, you know, and transformative over, I think, you know, the millennia of human history is we wait until there's a crisis sociopolitically or personally or whatever it is. And then you see major transitions, transformation, you see, you know, paradigm shifting philosophies and structures in military or political structures or medicine, education, you know, or spirituality. You can see this shift in something like, you know, the Calvinism that kind of came into even the Christian worldview, or these different moments where there's these kind of cataclysmic changes, and they usually are triggered by really dark periods of time and that cocoon kind of experience. And so for all of us, I think we can definitely start to say, okay, if we back up right now, we could say the entire human species is now at this pinnacle point.
That's right.
And back to the cancer patient you're just, you know, or patient you're just talking about, you know, what kind of crises do you see? And my usually see autoimmune disease, which is ultimately a breakdown in self-identity at the cellular level, or cancer, which is a complete loss of cell identity at the cell level. So both of these conditions are really a continuum of the same underlying process. And so the patient who really succeeds in that transformative process will always a year later say, this was the most important event of my life because it was this, you know, refiner's fire kind of event. I had to reconsider everything in my life. I had to change my perspective completely because I had clearly created this perfect storm within my body from my environment that allowed my self-identity to get this far off track. And so by doing, as we teach, just the simple tools of build your boundaries, hydrate across the boundaries, move the tissue, experience life at the profound level of a single neuron or a single muscle cell, and then extrapolate that through the whole power that you have as a 70 trillion celled organism that's working in a symphonic concert of life and creativeness. That's the kind of energy that we're capable of. And that's what, these moments of, crises, if we want to define them that way, are. But they're really, far from crisis. They're much more your most acute calls to action, your most acute calls to transformation.
Right.
And the faster we can make that shift, the more we get out of it, and the less suffering tends to be in the process.
So it's from that extreme crisis of just lack of identity that then calls your clients or your patients to just start to really recognize how they're living their life, what they're putting in their bodies, how their body responds, and more they start to build, their body physically builds a sense of identity, like those tight junctions. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and hydration and the microbiome. So I took biology base camp because I really wanted to understand how you correlated all of this. And so in the 4 months, every month you present, really basic stuff, eating good food,
Yeah,
a nutrient dense diet, movement and breathing and connection to the earth, grazing and fasting, and then water. And hydration is so much more. This is one thing I really loved learning from you, is that it's so much more than drinking water. So I actually had my phase angle measured a couple of years ago, and it was decent. But I drank a lot of water. And then I included Restore, your product that I want to talk about here in a minute too. And it was fascinating because I felt less thirsty and I drank less water, and my phase angle went up. It went up. Now it's like, I don't know, 7.4 or something.
fantastic.
And so talk about how you bring together really pretty simple choices: food, movement, connection to earth, water, pretty simple choices for a profound change, a profound transformation.
It is profound. I mean, that's the thing that continues to boggle my mind, and with the experiences that I have personally, as well as what I see in my patients. We've got patients in biology base camp that you mentioned there, that have been struggling with a particular issue for 20, 30 years. And again, the testimonials that come out are unbelievable. And the whole series, of course, is called Intrinsic Health Series, because my whole point of this whole thing is I'm not your doctor. I am not the source of healing in your life. No doctor should ever step into that role of I'm your mediator of health and healing. That's I think, the same mistake that a priest can make when he steps between you and God. A priest at their highest level should be an educator that keeps open this channel between you and a deity.
That guides the patient back to their own connection to creation, because it's
and so it needs to be not a third party. It needs to be a real channel that we open up between a deity and an individual. And in this case, in the medical field, the deity, if you will, is the universe itself. It's this. Right. It is the cocoon in which we live. Is not the planet Earth. It's the entire universe tied together. Mm-hmm. The reason why astrologers can find patterns in in behavior and personality based on the stars is because we are all connected to all of that. There is no separation. There is no discontinuity between a black hole in a galaxy far, far away, or the protons within our cells, which also have the same structure as a black hole. We now know through atomic physics that those two things are inherently connected. All black holes communicate in a singular space, and the data that flows into one black hole is put back out of that black hole in being informed then by all the other black holes. And we see this in something as simple as learning. And I think that's why there's a power in Biology Basecamp is I do the same thing every day in my clinic. I teach my patients, month in and month out, these are the fundamentals of health. And it takes me, 6 months, 9 months, sometimes 18 months. And actually, I still see patients where I'm now 7 years into the journey one-on-one with them, and I'm seeing them still stuck in the same patterns. Whereas in Biology Basecamp, where I'm meeting everybody through space and time, which in a space that seems separated, there's way more gravity that happens there because you've got 120 people that are going through this experience at the same time, which means all of their protons, all of their experience, all of their intellectual and spiritual content that's happening in parallel with the other patient is informing them. And so we get this compounding thing. And so we're steadily, doubling our thing. We're able to get 240 people into our January event, which I'm so excited about because that means there's twice as much energy than's ever been in that space before. And I know that it's going to accelerate the knowledge and the experience further out. And so think about that in your own life. If it doesn't, Biology Basecamp is just an example of it, but make this happen in other areas of your life where if you can double the number of people that are intent on a element of your purpose, you'll double the energy and the speed at which you're going to kind of get the resources you need or find the insights that you're missing.
Exactly. So talk about how hydration and being hydrated, like what difference does that make? And with the electromagnetic communication and how the microbiome works, and to me, this is what is so fascinating. There you go, you drink water. Just simple little things can change the planet.
It's profound. So the link that we found between the microbiome and hydration is tied into protein synthesis, the way in which your body produces the scaffold proteins that hold your cells together and in concert to one another. And so I would love for you to think through this. So as you listen to this, just close your eyes perhaps even and experience this in your own body, because you have experienced this on a level that maybe you weren't aware of before, but it definitely is there. And the experience is that if you close your eyes and bring your attention down into your belly, this is where your microbiome is most dominant, is in your colon, which starts down in your right pelvis and it kind of goes up your right side. It kind of hits the lower part of your ribs there, heads across to your left, and then straight back down into the left lower pelvis there. That whole system right there holds probably 80% of the microbiome of your body. And so you've got billions and billions and billions of organisms sitting in that space of your body. And interestingly, if you look at it, it almost looks like you could imagine it as an antenna dish or something. You've got this U-shaped space that's held by billions of organisms sending out a coherent energy field from each of their entities. So you get this huge energy field in your abdomen. When you usually pay attention to the spaces when you have bloating or pain or digestive issues, I want you to turn your attention there right now to maybe when you're feeling good and just start to focus in on this space. And what happens is this microbiome is actually the information center for how you need to respond to the environment. Are there toxins in your food or air that you're breathing? Is there toxins or man-made chemicals that have been changed from their organic structure that are now coursing through your bloodstream and doing damage, all these things that are a reality for each of us at any given moment? How your body responds to that is actually largely coming from the microbiome. The microbiome makes a wireless communication network, and this is what we discovered in 2012, was that each species within the microbiome makes a different carbon molecule with a very highly reactive three-dimensional structure on the end of it, which can interact then with all of the other carbon molecules. So we call these carbon snowflakes because each species makes a different variant. So snowflakes can then plug together and create a liquid circuit board for the transfer of information across space and time in your body. This is extraordinary because as you focus in on your intestines now, This is actually where the wireless communication tower, this is the cell phone tower of your body in a lot of ways. This is sending out a massive amount of energy and information up into the rest of your body, which is bizarre because at the bottom of that U is the Dan Qian. This is in ancient Chinese medicine and spirituality, the center of your spirit, your center of your awareness and everything else is right at the base of that colon. So the colon is almost like this reflector or this, three-dimensional structure that holds the Dan Qian at its center point. And so you're projecting who you are, and reflecting back at you who you are is literally the action and the responsiveness of the microbiome. I find this fascinating because we really depend heavily on our coaches at Biology Base Camp and in my clinic. Like, you can't actually succeed in transformation if you're alone. Solitary confinement is a very powerful, penalty on human beings.
Yes.
And so if we set you out with and a bunch of instructions, said, here's how you go be healthy, you go do that on your own, and if you don't, you're a failure, everybody's going to fail. Instead, if you give them a mirror to look at through, and so you give them another human being, say, this human being is going to look at you every week and reflect back at you what you're experiencing, what are your frustrations, what's the emotions that are coming up as you go through these levels of healing, what's happening, then the transformation just accelerates. And so in the same way, that microbiome is literally being that mirror to who you are.
Right.
Down to the cellular level now, this turns into the tight junctions that you mentioned. And so the reactiveness that our biology should have is always regeneration and repair. We should always be in a state of regen and repair. Every single cell in your body is equipped to repair any structure within there, the DNA, microtubules, the Golgi apparatus, all these big structures that are necessary for physiologic wellness in the cell should always be in a repair and regenerative state. If something happens where the cell is so traumatized that it cannot repair itself fast enough, or it's lost the machinery for repair, it should induce cell suicide and call in a stem cell to replace it completely. That's biology. Aging is a sign that we're losing that cellular communication, we're losing that wireless communication network, and we're starting to get cells functioning as independent, isolated organisms rather than in concert with 70 trillion other cells. And that decline in communication correlates with a decrease in this regenerative response. And so now we get injuries starting to accumulate, and we don't do the repair. To give you a sense of how severe this has to be in a single cell before it can create cancer, our laboratories have done a lot of work in taking biopsies of cancer cells from my patients and getting them into long-term culture.
Okay.
There's quite a lot of biochemical tricks to make this happen, but once you get that jump and you get a cancer cell to be in a steady state, we can do lots of science around how it behaves in different nutritional environments and different supplements and all this. But interestingly, we can also just take that cell now and genomically sequence it, and we tend to find 20 to 25,000 injuries in the DNA unrepaired. To give you a sense of how much DNA damage that is, we only have 20,000 genes. And so we hope that and expect that the majority of those, or at least a significant portion of those injuries, are not within a single gene, but in the promoters for those genes and other kind of surrounding genomic information. But we should be repairing our DNA on a daily basis. We have enzymes that zip along these DNA polymerases that repair mismatched nucleotides in our DNA. And so those have to grind to a halt, and they have to start either doing a poor job or completely stop doing the job of repair. And so this is the kind of decay of the communication thing, the decay of the regenerative process. To find out that the microbiome is responsible for putting this wireless communication network is very strange. It very much points back to this question of the chicken or egg of how did life start happening on this planet.
Yeah.
Clear that we cannot function as a single organism. Like, humans could not have shown up and expected to survive to any length of time if it hadn't been in the context of this very intentional microorganism environment that's always supporting human life.
Right.
And so
right.
we find out that this connectivity through the carbon snowflakes induces the protein and genetic response to injury. And in fact, it seems to be able to predict the risk of injury and prepare itself for that. And so the way we demonstrate this is in a small intestine and colon model, where we grow up a cohesive membrane of small intestine or colon, and then we can show it this communication network. And this membrane is defined in its integrity by the amount of tight junctions, which is the Velcro between the epithelial cells that would bind them together to create this intelligent barrier that might be billions and billions of cells covering 2 tennis courts in surface area that would be your gut. This huge membrane is held together by the Velcro, and in so doing, it creates not billions of cells, but one single identity structure that says, okay, outside membrane is outside, inside of this is myself. This is my self-identity boundary. That situation is unbelievably almost maintained by the bacteria and fungi within the ecosystem. And so if we take that small intestine and colon and we give it back the wireless communication network with no injury, no threat to the membrane, it immediately makes 40 to 50% more tight junctions. And so to see a repair response come in a non-threatened, non-injured state, and it simply says, oh, I'm not a bunch of human cells growing together. I'm a bunch of human cells that are in relationship to a greater ecosystem. I need to better define self-identity. That's what the cells are doing in a petri dish.
Wow.
So how much more powerful what's happening when it's in your own body still, where we see an immediate shift. And so we're extracting the communication network now from fossil soils, which date back about 60 million years ago, which is pertinent because 55 million years ago was our last big extinction on the planet. So predating the last big extinction, what was the communication network and intelligence of a soil that was that dense, with its diversity and energy production? What did that have to say to us? And the fact that we can take this soil that no human being, we've only been around 180,000 years by the fossil record. And so 180,000 years versus 60 million, you can imagine the excitement that I have every time I get to consume this myself or put this into a patient. We are so honored to be human beings being able to access this ancient intelligence of Mother Earth and see what happens. And what happens is a better sense of self. Self-identity at the boundary event. We see proliferation of the tight junctions. We see a better sense of apical versus basolateral side or outside inside kind of effect across those membranes again and again. The effects clinically are pretty profound. I can follow autoimmune patients in over 18 months of period. Once you've closed the gate and said, okay, that's outside, this is inside, I don't need to attack inside. Within 18 months, that big B cell that's been cranking out antibodies for years starts to settle down, and we see antibody levels starting to drop. Anywhere from 6 to 18 months in, you start to see the process happen. And usually by that 18 to 24 months, we see these antibodies really reaching often normal levels. And so that's an exciting reality, as you can redefine this boundary event with the support of the microbiome intelligence and communication network, and watch this human being become more self. Define those healthy boundaries to the outside world, understand who they are, and stop attacking themselves. And isn't there a correlation to this in the macro system, where when we're in collapse, when we're in health collapse, we become extremely egocentric. We lose perspective very quickly. We start to get hopeless. We start to get depressed. We start to be very paranoid. We start to, all of the hallmarks of collapse.
Boundaries. Exactly. Yeah. So in my research, I looked at the 4.3 billion years of evolution, where we started with the prokaryotes, the very, very simple cells. They didn't even have nucleus. And then what would force them? What I learned is that they had to be forced to become more complex and have the nucleus and have, now they have the mitochondria, and they become more complex internally and externally. And then this kept growing and growing and growing in complexity and internal networks, external networks. And so symbiosis is, when the two species need each other. They can't live without each other. So we have this gut biome, It has to have a human to be alive. The human has to have it to live, but they don't reproduce. So babies are not born with their microbiome. And so they gain it first in the vaginal canal through birth. As you know, breast milk contains compounds that doesn't even feed the human cells. It feeds the non-human cells. And so
Yes.
humans have to acquire the biome. So can you talk about different ways we keep that biome healthy and how we acquire that diversity? And then some of the things that are happening even in health food and nutritional circles where it's actually not diverse. You know, like some of the probiotics they are not contributing to diversity.
That's right. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. So, I mean, as we look at ourselves as kind of an outspringing of energy and focused life potential from the microbiome, and we see that as our organic soil by which we're going to sprout out of, it becomes really obvious that the first 10 steps of health are going to be microbiome support. And then the next 10 will be long-term support. Like there really isn't any moment that you can become divorced from the focus on how is my relationship with the microbiome. And this, of course, goes way beyond kind of what we're eating, but what we're breathing, where are we exercising, what environments at the macro level that we're putting ourselves into, what do we expect to get out of that? If we live our lives in, you know, carpeted cubicles and we go to plastic lined car and then into the garage and into our carpeted homes, you know, is that ever going to produce a healthy ecosystem? No, reinforce a very narrow and artificial biome. But of course, it starts much earlier than that. And that's, of course, the moment of birth. That's when we really get our foundation in life, is through the vaginal canal. And frighteningly, this is maybe the most important thing you learn from this whole show right now, is if you or anybody you know is going to be pregnant or has pregnancy on the way, if you can really inform them on how to do good vaginal swabbing in the event of a C-section, you can really change the life of a child. And so I really believe this could be one of our most important public health interventions, is teaching how to build the microbiome in the first breath of life. What happens in a vaginal canal is you'll spend anywhere, you know, from hours to days in that vaginal canal, moving through that last stage of labor. And during that time, mother's microbiome from her vaginal flora, which is an outspring of the colonic flora, is starting to seed this child. And, you know, there's a couple different variations on birth. My son happened to be born within the veil, which means, you know, the whole sac was intact. So he didn't see the vaginal flora, but for the sac itself. So the sac carried the whole microbiome. His own body didn't see it until that last couple seconds as he emerged from the womb and we broke the sac. And suddenly all the amniotic fluid is, you know, awash with the microbiome that's covering that sac and everything else. But for most children, there's a rupture of water initially, and as the membranes break, then throughout that journey, they're going to be covered with the microbiome. And so that microbiome is going to establish in the nares, the nasal passages, the sinus, the external ears, the pharynx, and the oral cavity. It's going to cover, of course, the whole skin, important zones in the armpits and other kind of erogenous zones ultimately, and then the groin and the rectum. And so you've got this, you know, totally unique situation where there's basically this huge milieu of bacteria and fungi that are watching this child pass through it, and they're all going to find their right niche within the ecosystem. You can imagine a coral reef here where you're supposed to have the red coral over there and the blue coral will be over here, and, you know, everything finds its beautiful mosaic of where life should be for that particular species. And so that's the travel through the vaginal canal, is that foundational event of building the coral reef from the beginning. Unfortunately, 32% of births in the United States are now by C-section, and in inner city hospitals, they're reporting as much as 44 to 47% of births by C-section. In China, to give you an example of the fact that this is not a US problem anymore, in China, 51% of births are done by C-section now. And so, a devastating reality is that our children are being born sterile. A C-section incision is done through a sterile incision in the front of the woman's abdomen, child never goes through the vaginal canal this route and is born in a sterile condition and then put, on a gurney in the hospital, and the likelihood of them inheriting the correct bacteria and fungi in their body is now pretty much zero. That C-section baby is now very prone to early life issues of dysbiosis, which start with symptoms like colic, where they have bloating and difficulty with digestion. They wake up throughout the night crying inconsolably. And then by 6 months in, they're starting to have upper respiratory infections. They're having chronic runny nose, and they're having bronchitis and pneumonia by the time they're 1. Ear infections become extremely prevalent in this population, so they're getting hit by antibiotics from their doctors and further narrowing their slowly developing
fed and processed foods.
Yeah, vicious cycle here. So even in the best case scenario of a breastfed kiddo, which you mentioned, the breastfeeding, of course, is a nice exposure microbiome. The breast itself, of course, has all kinds of variations of strep and staph, and those should diversify the number of species of strep and staph in the pharynx of the child. Now, without that diversification, they'll have a very few species of these drug-resistant strep staph organisms from the hospital and the like, and they can end up with ear infections and everything else.
Right.
That skin flora of the breast is important in the transition. The child's flora should change very significantly over the first 6 months of life. It does not have an innate immune system until about 6 months of life. And so really, if our belief system about the human immune system was correct, then all of us should have died in the first 6 months of life. But in fact, even children on formula, which has no antibodies from no microbiome benefit, those children aren't dying either by 6 months of age.
Right.
Know that if we remove the immune system through chemotherapy and the like, we kill people very quickly. And so there's something bigger. There's a bigger story to the immune system than just the antibodies we build and all of that. Our immune system is actually the microbiome itself. And so even in the worst case scenario of C-section baby, not breastfeeding, processed food, home environment, artificial, never sees outdoors, all of this, there's still enough microbiome around to kind of, hobble this kid's development, which I find amazing.
Right, exactly. And so I've heard you say, like, the human body is like this healing machine, and that we do have this, creation, healing potential always within us. And so, and you've seen that over and over where you can really ignite that and allow the body to have this complete transformation.
Precisely. And in that journey, we make this collision with hydration and the spirituality. I think I want to tie it back to that goal of yours here. And so that journey into the microbiome is going to now manifest this response mechanism within our genetics that will start building protein scaffolding throughout the system. Recent data from our laboratory just in the last couple of months is showing that we're not just building tight junctions with the communication network, we're actually building actin filaments. Actin is the primary protein filament that holds together the inside of the cell, the mitochondria and their structure and how they produce energy, the way in which material passages from the nucleus of your cell up into the cytoplasm to the cell membrane to external export to distant spaces. All of that is actin filaments. A neuron requires actin filaments to go the whole meter-long distance of its microscopic cell. It's pretty bizarre that a single neuron starting in your low back can go all the way to your toe. One single cell with this tiny microscopic projection, this long arm that reaches out to your toe to innervate the tip of your toe. That meter-long cell has to traffic energy, protein structures, enzymes, all of the stuff that the end of the cell needs, neurotransmitters, all of that needs to be sent for a meter-long journey, which is, millions of miles if you blow that up. This huge distance needs to be traversed, and it's, again, actin filaments. And so to find out that the chemicals that we're consuming in Roundup and the like are destroying the actin filaments, and that the microbiome is what prepares us and actually accelerates our production of actin and protects the actin from these chemicals, is profound. It means that the very scaffolding of life is very much informed, prepared, and regenerated by the information stream from the bacteria.
Right.
And my choice of words there is specific because it's not coming from the communication network. The bacteria fungi can't make actin. They're not producing these proteins for you. They're not making tight junctions. They're the wireless communication network that says, whoa, we need more protection up here. We need something else over here. We need more actin transport over here. That is the communication, that is regenerated or maintained by this microbiome in visible state.
Right.
You get the proteins to produce, then that's where hydration becomes possible. It turns out that the colon's main purpose has nothing to do with nutrient absorption. It's all the nutrient absorption for the most part is done in the small intestine.
Okay.
Colon and its immensity and its microbiome density is interesting because its main purpose is to get water into a biologically active state to cross into your body and become a hydrating force. With a deficient microbiome, you lose the protein structure, you lose the tight junction integrity, you lose the information stream that would tell the cells what it needs, and you lose this biologic threshold, this biologic boundary event that allows the water to be trafficked into your body successfully. And so we get desiccation or drying of the body, which is the aging process. And we're seeing that aging process accelerate dramatically over the last 20 years in our population. Our children now have 46% of our children in the United States have a disease.
Right.
It's an unbelievable statistic. How is that possible? Well, it's possible because they have no microbiome workforce. So they're dealing with at best 10% of their enzymatic workforce in their human cells. And then they're, desiccating and drying out from day one of life. So through this dehydration process, they look like a population of 80-year-olds with 46% with a chronic disease diagnosed by the time they're 12. And so we have this ridiculous acceleration of the aging process going on. Our immune systems are faltering early. Our metabolic processes are faltering early. Everything's like shutting down at an extraordinary rate now in our human population. And so it gives us a moment to just ask, what is the answer? If we're in such extraordinary collapse, and here we are dumping 5 billion pounds of Roundup and glyphosate molecules into the Earth's soils, which then contaminates our water systems, 75% of our air is contaminated, 75% of our rainfall is contaminated. Like, what is the point? The hope is the power of nature again. Number one, these molecules that we're extracting from nature are 60 million years old from her soil. So what kind of grace would plan for 60 million years ago would plan that humans may someday have a need, or maybe not humans even, but a species may someday need the intelligence of this day to overcome the toxicity of a future planet. And that toxicity is, of course, by our hand. And so it's bizarre that this antidote is planted in our ancient soils. That's a dramatic train entrance to kind of run home my point here. But the amazing reality is 60 million years ago, this thing planted in our soils that would then combat the soil toxins that we would put in there today. And so it's cool that it's from that source. It's not from anywhere but the soil that we're contaminating that we find this source of magic. And so this is my joy, is that, okay, yes, we are at a tipping point. We're at a tipping point on the planet. But it's clear that Mother Earth has solutions.
That's right.
Accelerate us past.
That's right.
And in a co-creative, in an acceptance of her support, rather than a battle against nature with ever more antibiotics and ever more complex chemotherapies. And instead of the battle mindset, the war, I'm so tired of the battle on cancer, the war against cancer, all of this like fight mentality. Out into the current psyche about cancer. No, these are the most injured, vulnerable, damaged cells in your body that have lost connection with you. Don't be afraid of them. Love this.
Right. Right.
This is literally the spot of your body that was least loved, most conflicted, most traumatized. And now you're just going to add trauma to it? No wonder are so unsuccessful at turning around this cancer thing. We are fundamentally wrong about the process from moment one. And so I just would encourage all of you to start to think about your own health differently. This is not a journey even. It is all right now. There is singularity in this moment. I think a lot of people feel daunted by the fact that, Doc, I've been kind of doing the wrong thing for 20, 30 years. I thought I was doing right thing. I was kind of eating kind of a healthy American. Right. I had no idea that I was so far down away from the pathway of true health. I had no, I'm 70 years old and I've never known how to drink water. How is that possible? I feel like there's no way I can recover health. Like how, you know, so we get this hopelessness, but the reality is physics is true. There is no time continuum. Once you reach into the quantum physics world of the biology from which we come, water being the classic quantum molecule, everything is right now. The future is right now. The past is right now. We can heal the past. We can prevent the disease of the future by bringing all of this knowledge into one space and letting you be aware of your full potential. And as soon as you shed fear, and as soon as you shed guilt, and as soon as you shed the insecurities that are keeping you locked in your current belief and patterns, unbelievable stuff can happen.
Exactly, yes. So Dr. Lynn Margulis, who is the scientist that brought symbiosis back into evolution, and because of her work, you know, we've completely changed taxonomy. And when we were in school, there were two kingdoms, plants and animals, and now there's 5, and we recognize fungus as its own kingdom. We used to, you know, call it a plant. That made no sense.
Yep.
Yeah, and so what she said when she was looking at bacteria is that the problem is the solution. So there was a time on the planet where all these microorganisms made too much toxic gas, and that toxic gas was oxygen. And the bacteria are like, oh no, there's a problem. We toxified our own environment. We are killing ourselves by producing too much toxins. All species toxifies their own environment, right? So the bacteria are like, what should we do? What should we do? Bam, it created the very first animal cell that now used that problem gas. And because of bacteria, millions of years ago, creating an animal cell, we now have humanity. Now, humans are interesting because we've evolved where we have to be connected. Like as soon as we're born, we have to nurse our babies. Babies have to be taken care of. So that's a really important part of what makes a human is this sense of connection and networking and interconnectedness. And so it's interesting that you've seen in some of your own patients. Well, in fact, I saw another interview of yours where the wife was sick or something, and you said, well, it brought her into community. Like it brought her in, you know, it brought her exactly what she needed.
Yes.
And so we can see this even in the environment where, you know, the fungus is the network for all of the species of a forest. It creates all the communication among species. It tells when they need to share resources. If this plant over here needs more phosphorus or this one needs more magnesium. And it's this communication. And then because of glyphosate, we're killing all of that. And yet, on the planetary level, there's a crisis, and within that is the solution. And so the solution for our own individual health becomes the same solution for the planet. These really simple little choices, really. And so in wrapping up here, what would you say are the primary simple little choices that people can make that would make a profound difference in their own body health, that sense of purpose, and changing the whole planetary paradigm? What would be the main recommendations?
The very first one goes back to where we started this conversation with the question of, you know, when have I been in flow, when have I not? Just completely come into the realization to begin with that you are on purpose now.
Right.
That you have everything you need for your next step, all of the relationships in your life, the data that you currently have at your fingertips, the experiences you've had throughout your lifetime have perfectly prepared you for this moment. And so let go of your insecurities and your fear and your guilt. And the faster and more completely you can do that, the more quickly you're going to move into a biologic and spiritual wellness. And so you have to lose that programming. And I just would encourage you that the areas where you in life where you felt darkest and most vulnerable and most insecure was probably the points at which you were going through the most important transitions and transformations of your life. And that may be right now. This may be a point of crisis for you, and therefore you're seeking this information. And so start with that realization of, oh my gosh, I am exactly where I need to be. Exactly the only place I could possibly be, which is right now. And I am equipped now with all of the future information and all of the information in Zach's head and Onani and all of the people around you. We are with you in the singularity moment, and we have, as a community, the total package. We have the complete story of life itself within us. We don't even have to get it in these heads. In fact, it looks like if we carry that into the cocoon, we're screwed. And so don't worry about, the paucity of information that you may have in your head. Memory is a huge piece for us. We are all struggling with memory right now. We see at a very early age, we're losing cognitive memory. Let go of your concern about that. You have all knowledge within the tissues of your body. That your mind can't access that information right now does not mean that you don't have the information within you. So divorce yourself of the fear, divorce yourself of the insecurities, the guilt, all of this, and start to receive the simple gifts of the following. Number one, wake up in gratitude. Write down a quick list of things you're grateful for, which might be, I just took another breath and I'm here with another dawn, and the sun is beautiful orange color in the sky of California this morning when I was waking up, and I'm grateful for that. And I have loved ones around me, even if they're estranged or I don't talk to them. The reality is I have humans that have shaped me through their insecurities and other things. Sure. But who cares? They were there in your life, put there on purpose because you called them in. This is the journey you and your soul have asked for, and you're on it. And so you're on purpose. So wake up in gratitude. Then consume the simplest of stuff around you. The lower you can get on the food chain, the healthier you're going to be. Get nutrient-dense foods from the garden. Grow something in your garden. Grow something in your window if you don't have a backyard. A mint plant is bulletproof. So if you need to start at a mint plant, go there. A basil plant, do something in the window, something in the sidewalk, then something in the backyard. Then let that slippery slope of co-creation of nutrients in your life, not because you have to feed yourself everything from the garden, but because every time you touch a vegetable or a fruit that you've grown, you connect to the whole human history of food production, right, which is receiving. It's a gifting from Mother Nature herself. So go into that food environment there. Get in touch with the microbiome, breathe real air, get outside, break your cycle that you're in, whatever it is right now. If you go to the same gym 5 days a week and that's your workout regimen, shift it up and get outside and join a hiking club and start breathing real air again. Do something different. Get that gift of mobility in your life. If it's as simple as you can get out as far as your backyard, then sit in your backyard for an extra hour. Get this real life back in touch. Slip your shoes off and stick them in the grass. If you haven't felt grass between your toes recently, you're missing a joyful experience in life.
Right.
So children love to be barefoot because it gives them all of the stimulation of life itself. They want to be connected to Mother Earth. Had my niece and nephew out at the beach the other day, and they immediately wanted to just strip off all their clothes and they lay down in the sand. Like, right. No, like we don't do that as adults. To be like, oh, I'm going to get sand all over me. Well, that's stupid. We come from the dirt, and so these kids just like wallow in it, and they're naked, and they're running around in the surf, and they're just like incarnate joy. And here the adults are all worried. Well, I got to get them back in the car, and there's going to be sand in the car, and it's like, wow, we are so programmed away from the innate joy that we have the potential to grab by reconnecting to Mother Nature. And so get crazy, get naked outside, get right, connected to the earth itself. And you're going to find that you're way more joyful and you're way more vigorous than you might think you are right at the moment. And health is an experience more than a biologic process. It's an experience right now completely.
Beautiful. So I'll put the links down below, but how can people get a hold of you?
Sure. My educational website that kind of encompasses a lot of what I do is being remapped right now, but it'll be back up in its full state by the end of the month. That's zachbushmd.com. My podcast and a bunch of other educational material will be better presented in that space with this new revision, zachbushmd.com. Then the Restore product, which is the ancient soil dirt that we were talking about,
Right.
that Restore, the number 4, life.com. My big call to action, if you want to support what we're doing right now, is go and check out farmersfootprint.us. We are a nonprofit that's just coming online where we'll be able to take your $100 a year donations to sponsor 1 acre of chemical farming right now and turn it back to culture. And so we're very excited about this nonprofit.
Wow.
And I think it's our goal is to transition 10 million acres under chemical farming right now back to this amount over the next 3 years. So get excited about farmersfootprint.us.
Yes.
Also a communication tool. And so we're building a 30-minute docuseries, so a bunch of 30-minute segments. The first full-length 30-minute one will be out in January or so. You can see the trailer coming up online in the next couple weeks at farmersfootprint.us. So get involved in the regeneration of our planet here by supporting our farmers. Really, really want to help heal the planet. They're eager for it, and so we don't need to see them as the bad guy. They really want the solution as much as you want it for you and your children. So engage through all those avenues. Thank you so much for your time, Onani, and
Thank you so much. And I'll have a link as well to my work. I have a wonderful, fun Facebook page or group called How Creation Works. And I'll have a free gift on the 7 simple steps or 7 simple habits for body-spirit connection. So thank you so much. This has been absolutely delightful, and I'm really happy that you're contributing all of this beautiful work. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Onani. Thanks for everybody's time.
Yes.